again, everybody. And once again, welcome to a ULD Care video interview on the subject of fire containment. And today, I'm very happy to have with me Audun, who is now the president of Nordisk Aviation Products. I have known Audun for about 4 years since he joined Nordisk as the engineering director. He's now moved on and recently took up the position of president, for which congratulations are in order. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the video over to Audun and ask him to tell us a little bit about what's going on in the world of fire containment from his perspective. Audun, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bob. And appreciate your congratulations. So at Nordisk, of course, fire containment and fire-resistant containers is a very important part of our efforts in the industry, where we have been for 50 years, doing, making the industry a bit safer for passengers, for crew, and for the cargo itself. The ULDs that we produce are, of course, a part of the chain. So it's at least 3-layer approach. It's the packaging of the product, it's the ULD, and it's the cargo compartment. So whatever effort can be made in those areas would be beneficial. So for our purpose, it's, how can we make the ULD integrate into this chain with the right price, the right performance, and the right quality. So we see a number of developments ongoing. Some have progressed pretty far, some haven't. And there is a latency in the industry to make the changes. There's a latency in the standards, in the regulations, and in the operators on the willingness to spend the necessary time and money and resources to make it happen. So on our side, we are it's divided in the class A and the class D type of product ranges, where we have to look at, the panels used, so that the materials in the panels, is it aluminum, is it composites, what's the test load that we need to cover, how will it operate for the airlines, the time it takes to turn around the product, etc. And then we can integrate with sensors, making it detect smoke internal. We can make it detect if the door is closed or not. We can interact then with the plane to keep the system more safe. And as always in a fire situation, the control of airflow is vital. So not too much, not too little. We want to make sure that our product emits the toxic gases, that it emits enough smoke to set off any alarm system that requires it, but not too much, because then you feed the fire. So all these considerations gives us both opportunities and challenges to achieve in this part of the market. So I guess that's a sort of a short way of saying what we see as the way forward.
Certainly, listening to what you've just laid out, it sounds like you've got a fair number of levers, shall I say, to pull. I'm very interested to hear you talk about the use of internal sensors at a ULD level rather than at a cargo hold level. That's is there anything more you can tell us about that particular development?
Well, I can at least say that, with the Bluetooth technology and the way then you can get the signal out to either the plane, or which would be the case in this scenario, or to the ground if you're moving between planes. And that's where we will have possibility. And that has been demonstrated to detect smoke, to detect if the air tightness of the door, so if light is emitted into the container, this can be triggered, and you will have the possibility to correct it. So a number of developments are ongoing in that region, and I think that will be a good supplement to making sure that the product actually works when it is in operations, and not, you know, rely on the operator having done it correctly, and that's your only safety net.
Yes, I mean, as Jordi Care has a huge ambition to encourage a higher level of competence on the ramp, but of course we're fighting to a certain extent a losing battle given the huge degree of turnover in the ramp, and I agree with you that there's a huge challenge here to make sure that these containers are in a fire containment condition, because I think, correct me here if I'm wrong, what is the allowable damage on a typical fire containment container these days? Are you allowed any kind of holes at all?
You will be allowed repairs, but holes would typically not be allowed. You can have some, you know, designed in drainage holes maybe in the base, but you can't have holes in the panels, for example. Those would have to be patched before they can go and be sort of regarded as a FRC container again.
Wow.
So that level is dropping.
I mean, that's a huge kind of contradiction in an industry that's been used for years to using containers with significant amounts of damage on them and just perhaps putting a piece of tape over it, or probably nothing at all, to suddenly be told, oh no, now you can't use it if it's even got the smallest hole. That's going to be quite an operational challenge.
Yeah, well, you can of course use the container, but you can't class it as an FRC container.
Which kind of
yeah, you reduce its
the point.
performance. You're correct.
What's your views on what I hear talking to people is that the fire load, the potential energy in the batteries isn't standing still either. They seem to be becoming ever more powerful as the battery manufacturers seek to get more and more operating hours. Are we still chasing a never-ending ambition? Are we ever going to get FRC that can really protect us against even the most intense fire, or is there always going to have to be an acceptance of some risk?
I think it will be the latter. So some risk must be accepted. But as you know, there is a Class A ISO standard. There is now very recently an SAE standard for Class A fire, but nothing for Class D. So there is a working group at SAE, but it hasn't produced any standards yet. So it's at the starting point of defining something that could become the first minimum performance standard of you know, a fire of combustible metals. So it's hard to say what sort of how we can raise the bar, you know, starting from scratch. What could be the first step of a minimum performance standard for Class D? And
how does a manufacturer,
you know,
like Nordisk, approach this? If there is no bar for you to jump over, how do you decide what is an acceptable standard?
Well, you have to work with, for example, a pilot customer to define what they see as a typical load that they would like to know, that they can use, say they can use in their risk analysis to prove to crew and to their own management that this will then be the risk level that we have to accept. So that's being done, but that again leaves the risk that you might develop a product that doesn't meet whatever becomes the official requirement further down the road. But that's how it is, and that's how it needs to be done. We can't wait for something to be finished and then start working. It has to be in parallel. And of course also to contribute in the industry's work to define the standard.
Yes.
It's also very important.
Tell me, do you see, I mean, I can't recall how many conversations I've had with people about fire containment devices, but do you foresee that sometime in the future, virtually that every container will be a fire containment device in its own rights? Do you think that'll ever be the case?
It might be a case that FAA, EASA will impose the AS 8992 on products moving forward. You know, when they now work hard to incorporate the latest Class A standard,
Right.
You know, it's highly likely that it becomes mandatory, but they also have the freedom to subtract something, to add something to the standard that, you know, makes exceptions. And it's only Class A, so it's not really a too hard hurdle to make in terms of a ULD design. It's much harder to contain the lithium-ion battery fires. So of course, some degree of compulsory will be implemented by FAA and EASA, but it won't have, you know, the effect on existing fleet, but it might have a strong effect on new fleet additions. And over time, that will sort of make the fleet more fire safe.
That's just, I'm interested, picking up on the question I asked about serviceability. Would you say the same standard will apply for a Class A container? Zero holes of any kind?
Well, if you are to maintain the fire resistant capability of the container, that, you know, you will have to prove that it can withstand the same Class A fire with the damage. And I think that will be very hard because of the airflow. So it's kind of a given that it has to be fairly tight on the air pressure test to be able to, you know, have some kind of damage while flying.
Wow, that's going to be quite a challenge for the industry to deal with.
Yes.
Okay.
So but it also tells you that the panels you use should be relatively robust. They shouldn't easily get damaged. So you can also do your design way around it.
Right. Is this will this have an impact on typical container tear weight? Because of course the other discussion is always about making the containers ever lighter. Is there a big impact when we come to fire resistant container?
No, you'll find that, you know, fire resistant panels are, you know, more or less, they might be a bit thicker than aluminium, but the density is lighter. So overall, it's similar weight to aluminium. So not really a tear weight increase.
Okay. And while we're talking about these panels, is there anything technologically new on the horizon as far as fire containment materials? Are we looking, or is things fairly stable?
Fairly stable. It's more, you know, what is the solidity of the supply chain? How many alternatives do you have? How many sourcing points do you have, etc. So it's not any quantum leaps in terms of technology.
And that goes for sort of fire containment, full stop, across the whole spectrum of fire containment.
Yeah, I would say so, but maybe on the sensor side, there might be more, you know, abrupt changes than on the material side.
Okay. And I mean, so what does, well, I think we've covered the challenges, which is really the lack of a standard, which is nothing new in this industry. How many years did it take for the TSO on the tie down straps? I think that was about 20 years. It's awfully slow, but so those are some of the challenges. What do you see as being some of the opportunities in this area? How do you foresee the future? What might things look like 5 years from now? Would you care to do some crystal ball gazing?
Well, I can say something. It won't be any prediction at all, but of course there are some that are willing to pay for safety already. So that is being done. So some companies are ahead in this game, investing and implementing ULDs and all other types of measures on all different layers to make this as safe as possible. Some others will follow pretty soon and be, you know, the 5-star airline or the 5-star freighter that puts safety high up there. And then you will have more and more regulations coming in. I mean, I guess FAA have said that they should fast track this C90E revision that will refer to the Class A, you know, in a couple of months. But you know, we know when they've released it, but is it beginning of next year or whatever? Then that's also going to drive more customers or more airlines to start making plans and start making introductions and trials and figuring out where they want to go on this matter.
Yeah.
So it might become, you know, you say 5 years. Maybe in 5 years you have, you know, all new fleet being at least Class A, even though you can solve that with an aluminum container with a door design that is just about tight enough to pass the test. How that will function over time, I guess you will gradually go towards a more composite-based ULD to gradually absorb the next level of requirements that will come. So it will be, you know, first step Class A, then gradually moving towards a Class D or even sort of a combined load, A plus D plus something else. So it will be a very important segment of the air cargo industry in the years to come.
I'm interested, you mentioned just now the door, because I mean, if I go out on the ramp and have a walk around, I hate to guess, but if I could find less than 50% of container doors that are not done up properly, I'd be happy. It is really having a fully functional and correctly closed door going to become an absolute requirement?
Well, if it isn't, it should be, because if the door is not closed correctly, you will have airflow preventing the extinguishing or making sure that the fire will not be extinguished by the ULD.
Right.
There will be too much airflow. So type of door is going to be very, very important. So typically bar doors, roll-up doors, those types of doors are the airtight ones. And then you need to design in the right air exchange into it. But net cover is tricky. Then you're leaving most of the uncertainty to the operator, because there are a number of ways not to close it properly.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would say that's a critical design parameter for us, and it should be critical for, you know, before saying airworthy to a ULD every day, you should make sure that the door is closed as instructed.
Wow, this is just raising the bar a considerable amount when it comes to both training and compliance. I can see that being quite a challenging.
Yeah, but I think also you'll see from that more and more doors will be of the bar type, you know, with some over-centric closing, or a roll-up door or something similar that sort of fits into a slot, and that's how you close it, not, you know, 20 buckles or 40 buckles needed to do it. And time-wise, it's also a good idea. So that's probably where it will go.
Very interesting. Audun, I think we're clock's running against us here. But
okay.
Before we close, have you got any last comments you'd like to make on the subject?
Well, I'd like to mention that, you know, typically fire-resistant containers have been used on the main deck, but it's also coming on the lower deck. So we've done product ranges for main deck for a long time. So we have a large portfolio, but it's also now moving on the lower deck for AKE, AKH, and so on. So there's obvious interest in the industry to also have it on passenger planes. Somehow abrupted a little bit by the COVID, but it will start to move again.
Okay, well, that's...
So I see good opportunities and of course the challenges, but we'll have to cope with them.
Excellent. Audun, I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your views on this ever evolving and always interesting subject. Yes, I learn something every time I talk to people about fire containment. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you, Bob.